Good evening, all of you. I hope you're all well and staying warm. I understand also it's very close to Christmas, so it must be difficult to, to have to come and listen to a lecture. And I think it would have been so lovely, actually, and also in the spirit of theatre, if we could have had this class just around a fire, either outside or around the hearth. And like we say in Khasi, saudang ka lingwiar de pay. And I think perhaps someday we could gather together and have a session like that. But before I begin, I would just like to share a little bit about myself. I completed my bachelor's actually in botany when I was in college in Chennai. And when I was doing my bachelor's in botany, that's when I discovered my passion that was in theatre. And once I was on stage, once I was speaking my lines, living these different characters that I was studying and reading about the plays that we were doing, I felt that I was transformed into another world, a world of stories and imagination and possibilities. And I could be whoever I wanted to be at that moment in time. Therefore, I urge all of you, as I always urge my students, to take time to find what your interests are, your passions, and let that lead you. And as I understand, your first semester students, there's so much to explore. You've just come out of school. Everything's a new world. It's a huge jump now into college, but find out what interests you. Get interested, get curious, and see how this interest can lead you to do bigger things that will make you happy. One lecture is definitely not enough to acquaint you with everything about the theatre, but I hope. So what I've done with today's presentation is have a series of images. And I hope that through these images, you'll be able to get an understanding of how theatre and performance has evolved through the ages. So let me just start by sharing screen. Just taking these couple of representational images, stock images from the internet, just to help you understand. I won't make the lecture very complicated. I'll go slow. You can stop me at any time, ask questions, but I'll run you through a series of images that give you an idea of how theatre has developed across the ages, across different continents, civilizations, years. Yeah. So let's begin by asking, what is theatre? The root of theatre is storytelling. And one of the oldest forms of theatre was when hunters in the past would recount their hunting stories around the fireplace. They enacted their encounters with the wild animals they hunted, and the most spontaneous ones would play out the hunt to an audience in their communities. So the first image you have here is of a drawing, of a cave drawing of a hunt. And you can actually go back and trace, this would have been the first form of theatre that existed. And it was really for entertainment, was really to kind of share what their stories are, to talk about what these hunts are, to describe these animals, describe it to an audience and tell them that this was what happened. So it's as I said, the root of theatre is storytelling. Over the years, more advanced and structured forms of theatre began to develop in different civilizations. And each of these styles of performance developed in close connection to the architecture of the performance space or arena. For example, we come to the Greek theatre. And if you look at this picture, if you look at the amphitheaters that were designed outdoors, where audiences were seated around in this ascending order on the steps. So the audience would be sitting on the steps, and then you have the players or the actors, and the chorus would be up there on the stage and they would be performing. And this way, the way this space is designed was also in a way that the sound was amplified within the space. So there was no real need for microphones that we have now, because they could speak and the sound sort of traveled through the space, and the audience could hear what was being sung, what was being said. And Greek tragedies, comedy, satires were written and performed with actors in the Greek chorus. And plays, and maybe I'm pretty sure since you're doing English literature, I'm pretty sure you'd be studying about Greek theatre sometime in your course as well. So plays were categorized under 3 categories. You have tragedy, comedy, and satires. And some of these very interesting plays. So here's another example of how the theatre developed, or how the theatre was structured, and how they were really places that people would gather and come together and listen and kind of have this connection. It was very stylized. It wasn't realistic. It was very stylized. It was the tragedies were played out. They would have a group of people who would be the chorus, who would kind of act as the society that would respond to what these plays were all about. And a lot of these, for example, you had plays like Antigone, Oedipus Rex, and these plays were really about man's destiny and how human relationships with the gods, relationships amongst themselves, relationships with kings. So they were really grand tragedies and grand performances that people would spend a long time listening to them, watching them, and enjoying them. We move on now to the Globe Theatre. And I understand you're also doing Shakespeare right now. As I know, I think it's The Merchant of Venice that you're working on. So the next space that I'm showing you is the Globe Theatre, and this is in London. This is where Shakespeare would have performed his plays. And if you look at again, if you look at the architecture, it's quite similar. You know, you have the audience seated sort of again around the galleries, and you have the performance happening down there below, so everyone could see them. And if you think of Shakespeare, the one thing that comes to mind is melodrama. Okay, there's a lot of, I mean, the texts are brilliant. You'll be studying them, you'll be reading them, they're brilliant. And there's so much of the focus that is there is actually melodrama. You think of Romeo and Juliet, even Merchant of Venice, you think of all these plays, and there's so much of melodrama. And one thing about the performance style was, I remember when I was studying melodrama, one of my teachers had said that, you know, focus on diagonals, focus on how your body can really emote emotions, that you really stretch your body and you say, this is how I'm feeling, or to be or not to be, and you really stretch out your body and you really stretch out your hand. And this was because they were performing to, if you look at the space here, during Shakespeare's time, they were performing to the patrons or the funders who were sitting up there on the galleries. And the ones who were below were actually the people who could not afford to pay much, who were there, the common people sort of who came to enjoy theatre. But the important ones were sitting up there on the galleries, and they were the ones who sort of kept the theatre going. They were the ones who were paying money. They were the ones who were the funders, the main funders, to keep the show going. So the style of performance is very much melodrama. Perhaps something to think about if you ever want to experiment with Shakespeare, and if you ever want to think why, when we think of Shakespeare, we really enunciate, and our body sort of just expands and becomes something else. So again, another very stylized way of performance. So this is a picture of the Globe Theatre. I hope someday you will be able to travel and be able to see it for yourself and watch a play there, perhaps. So this is how the audience would be seated. They're all around. This here is an example of a play that of Shakespeare's The Tempest that we had performed. I just wanted to give you examples also. And this performance of The Tempest was actually done in a circus ring. And this was an attempt to bring the theatre and the circus together, and to see how Shakespeare can be explored through the space of the circus. And again, if you think of the circus ring, it's a circular ring, and audience are seated around, pretty much very, very similar to how you see this. You have the circus ring around, and audience are seated around. So we performed this play in Kerala, in Kerala and in Goa. This was in 2016, around a circus ring. That's the Globe Theatre, as you can see it. Okay, so moving on to another space is so we started with the Greek theatre, we move on to the Globe Theatre, Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, and we move on to a proscenium space. And for this space, I want you to think of the Sosotham Auditorium, the ones who are from here, from Meghalaya. Just think of these auditoriums, these stages that we have now. That stage is a proscenium stage that developed. Why? Because it has an arch. I don't know if you can see the facade just outside the sort of golden arch that you have. And this is the proscenium stage. And this stage is actually, you started with this stage in order to move on to more realistic styles of acting or realism. So more towards, and when I speak of realism, I speak of more to do with who we are as a society, as a middle-class society, as a family, as human relationships that are more domestic, that we can relate to, that everyday experiences. So we move from the Greek tragedies to melodrama to more personal relationships, interpersonal relationships, relationships that we have within families, relationships that we have at home. And slowly, the space started to change into a proscenium stage. And this is a very common stage that we see now. I think every time we think of a stage, we say, okay, we go up on stage and that's the stage that we perform in. If you think of realism, just a few examples that I'll give you is you think of Anton Chekhov, the writer, who is a Russian playwright, very famous play of his called Cherry Orchard. You think of Henrik Ibsen, who is a Norwegian playwright, A Doll's House. And you also think of modern Indian drama, names like Vijay Tendulkar, Badal Sarkar. And as I said, through these plays, they became the style of acting became more realistic. It dealt with everyday problems. It dealt with problems of the middle class society. It dealt with concerns of the society, and realism was actually taken up by cinema, it's a form whereby you construct this world on stage where it feels very real. It feels like, as an audience, you watch the play, you watch it unfold, and you feel that you're actually entering into the lives of the people. You're not so disconnected from them. It's no longer so stylized, or it's no longer melodramatic, but it's really connected to how their lives are going, how their lives are moving. And I'm just showing you an example of a play that I had performed. And this was when I was in Delhi. We'd also performed this play in Pakistan. This was a play by Badal Sarkar, a Bengali playwright, and it was called Baki Itihas. So if you can see the play, it moves into a more domestic scene. I'm here giving tea to somebody. I'm this Bengali lady in this household, and the problem I face in my marriage, the problem I face with my family. So very much problems that we can now relate to. Okay. So moving on. The next space that I want to show you is the Black Box Theatre, which is the theatre that is the most popular right now, which is an experimental space. So going back, I hope I'm not going too fast, but going back, we started with theatre around, just telling stories around the fireplace. The hunters would come back and enact around the fireplace. We saw the space of the Greek theatre, which was the amphitheatre, where everything was amplified. The performance was very stylized and dramatic, and you had to reach out to an audience. It was outdoors. Then we moved on to the Globe Theatre, which had a similar sort of setting, still melodramatic, but more contained, perhaps more indoors. After that, we moved to the proscenium stage, which had to do with realistic acting, where the audience would watch what was going on, which dealt with more relations of human relations, personal relations. And then now we move on to the experimental space, or the black box theater. And this is a very common theater that we see now across. If you go, I mean, here in Meghalaya, we still have a lot to do in terms of theater. The space that we have is the Susatham Auditorium, but we also have the SICPAC, which is the Shillong International Center for Performing Arts. This is in Lapdiang. I don't know if you have had a chance to see the space, but they're trying to develop different spaces that can allow different performances to happen. But I think here in Meghalaya, we're really still struggling to kind of have an understanding of these spaces. But if you move out to the bigger cities or even outside, newer spaces are starting to develop that are more accessible, that are also easier to maintain, which is, like I said, something like this, the black box theater, which is just a black box. The audience can be seated anywhere they want to be seated. The seating can be changed around, and the performance can happen. And you also don't have something as elaborate as this anymore. You know, you don't have a backdrop, and you don't have curtains, you don't have wings, but you have just a plain area, which is the black box theater. And a little bit also about this is that the black box theater sort of creates a new relationship with the audience, where you actually break this idea of the fourth wall. I don't know if you will ever study about the fourth wall, but if you think of cinema, and you watch movies, and the actors never really look into the camera, right? They never really address the audience directly. They're speaking amongst themselves. So as an audience, you watch into their lives, you watch what is going on, but they never really address us. They never really speak to us directly. That fourth wall, this invisible fourth wall, is constantly maintained. But what is happening now is you break that fourth wall. There are newer performances where, especially in theater, where the audience, where the performers or the actors break that fourth wall and address the audience directly, whereby they also bring in the audience into the performance. So the audience don't just become watchers or spectators of the show, but they also become, they also interact with the performance. And I'll just give you talk a bit perhaps about Bertolt Brecht, from whom the concept of breaking the fourth wall of realism can be traced to. He was a German playwright, and he had written so much about his plays. Really, if you read his plays, it's really about you don't just perform amongst yourselves as actors, but you actually also address the audience, because the audience are thinking members of society, and you would also like them to be engaged, not just as spectators, but also as actors, as participants in the play. So that is where you break this fourth wall, where you involve them also in the performance. So over the years, as I'm moving, into these different styles, I think I just want to give you just a glimpse, really, of how each of these forms developed, how each of these forms developed in relation to what the society is, in relation to what their surroundings are, what works for them, what is, now we don't have money to construct, big amphitheaters anymore, or we don't have, we can't really construct, and people don't also have, perhaps, won't spend so much time going to the theaters with very elaborate settings and elaborate designs, but they prefer something smaller, more contained, more minimalistic, that could work for them. So let's move on to the next image. This is just an example again of another very interesting space in Kerala. So what I've shown you are very much European styles of performance that you can read about, that literature has been written about them, the images about them. But here we're coming much closer home, and this is a space in Kerala which is called Natna Kairali. And this is also a performance space which is made entirely out of mud. It's mud and it's thatch roof and it's wood, and this is a performance space again that, as you can see, you have a small stage out there and then the audience are seated here. Very simple, very minimalistic, very, very little lighting, but the performances that come out of this are really extremely powerful. And this is an example of a theatre performance called Kudiyatam, which developed in Kerala, which, if some of you know Kathakali, it's kind of related to that, but it's really a performance of that they take from the Ramayana, from the Mahabharata, and you have these different characters, these stock characters that perform for an audience. They perform in front of this lamp, and Kudiyatam is called Theatre of the Eyes. This is a very famous performer, Kapila Venu, that also taught us. She's a brilliant performer. You can Google her and find her online, and you can see how she uses the kind of theater that she performs is really, it's more physical. It's about how you use the eyes and how you focus on an audience, and you tell a story through your body. Not necessarily through the words or through dialogues, but you tell a story through the body. And this is the space that they actually, so the stage is up there. They have a lamp there, they have the audience seated here, and they have the performance. The next space I will come to is very much closer home. This is the Khasi National Darbar Hall in Mokhar. So for the ones who are here in Shillong, in Meghalaya, we have these community halls around, all around. I think every locality has these community halls. And the reason why I'm bringing us to this space is because, for me, when I returned home, when I came back, I realized that I had studied about all these different styles of performance and studied about all these different types of theater, but I realized that I came home and I didn't have any of this. I didn't have any of this infrastructure. I didn't have any of the equipment that I had when I was studying there, and I didn't really have a space to sort of claim as my space, as my performance space. And for me, it was trying to find what would be a space that would work for me. And it's still a journey, but I think it's a very interesting journey, because I think space, the kind of space that you occupy, the space that you look out for, the spaces that you want to experiment with, they determine also, who is allowed to come into that space, who are the audience who can come in to that space, whom are you performing to, how are you using that space, is that space flexible enough for you to use it in different ways. And there's always the one thing that I think we don't usually talk about, because when you think of theater, we think of acting, we think of scripts, but the one thing that is very interesting for me is also space. What is it that we have around us that will encourage the kind of interaction, the kind of acting, the kind of connection, the kind of performance that we have with our audience? So this is just a picture of the Khasi National Darbar Hall. Maybe one day you can, if you're curious, you can take a walk. I think it's very close, Sinod College and Mokhar. You can just take a walk and observe these spaces and try to imagine what are the performances that could happen here? Where could the audience be seated? What could you do? What are the possibilities of the space? And also, what does this space, hold? Is it a space that, who are the people who come into the space? The next is moving on to a bit about street theater. So we've seen more structured spaces of of theatre and performance. And now we're moving into completely unstructured spaces, which is street theatre. And street theatre is a form that exists, everywhere, that can exist everywhere, that doesn't need anything, that doesn't need structure, that doesn't need architecture, nothing. All you require is, again, this free space, open space, and perform it everywhere. This is an example of a street theatre by Safdar Hashmi. Safdar Hashmi was a theatre practitioner, a theatre activist, and best known for his work with street theatre in India, which was very, very political. And he co-founded the Jana Natya Manch, which is the People's Theatre Front that grew out of the Indian People's Theatre Association. So Safdar Hashmi this is another picture of how the street theatre is. And in street theatre, like I said, you don't really need a space. Any space will do. I mean, you don't need a structured space. Of course, you need a space, but you don't need a structured space. Any space will do. It's again it's a very free space, and it's also a space that is available to everyone, whether it's the audience. You don't pay money for it. You just anybody and everybody is welcome in this space and can watch it. And it's very, very political. A lot of issues that you want to talk about society that troubles a society can be performed out in the streets. So these are just examples of street theatre. Moving on, much closer home, I just want to introduce you to two theatre practitioners from Manipur. One is Sabitri Ima and her husband, the late Haisnam Kanhailal. These are two very important theatre practitioners who really started, who went back to Manipur and started a form of theatre that was highly experimental, very physical, and also very related to who we are as a community. And I'm coming closer to them. Why? Because they have been hugely instrumental in my journey as a performer. Because as I said, I gained all this knowledge, whether it's from Delhi, whether it's from Europe, studying about all these different styles, melodramatic styles and stylized and physical theatre, studying about modern Indian drama. And the sad part about modern Indian drama, which I had shown you earlier as playing a Bengali lady, is that modern Indian drama does not, till date as yet, does not include the Northeast, in the sense that, we still do not have scripts coming out of the Northeast. We still don't know what it is to talk about the society that we are here in the Northeast, the different communities that exist here. And there's still much need for literature from the Northeast to come out. And these two have been hugely influential in starting this form of theatre where they draw from their folk tales, where they draw from the stories of their community, where they draw from stories that are not written, scripts that are not written, but scripts that are passed down through generations by word of mouth, just by speaking about them, or just by sitting around the fireplace and telling these stories. And they developed a very interesting form of physical theatre, which has been highly influential in my journey as an artist. So here's a short example, a small example of Babette. It's a Manipuri folk tale about a mother bird who tries and protects her little baby birds, these little chicks. As you can see, the people behind, the little baby birds, and she tries and protects them from the cat. And the cat can sort of be looked at as this outside force, or this colonizer that is trying to take away what our culture is, that is trying to erase what our culture is, that is trying to replace the stories that we have with something else. And in this very touching performance, the performance is also online if you're curious. It's called Babette. In this very touching performance, the mother bird tries and protects her little baby birds from the influence of this cat. And again, it's, if you look at the folk tales, they're very, the story is very simple. It's a mother bird, birds, and a cat, but it can be interpreted on a much bigger and larger context. Another example is example where she plays Draupadi, the story of Draupadi from the Mahabharata, where here she talks about the conflict in Manipur, about the presence of the armed forces that have really controlled or continue to control perhaps the lives in Manipur. And as a sign of protest, Sabitri Ima had performed this text by Mahashweta Devi about Draupadi, the anguish of Draupadi, and very powerful, very, very influential performance. So what this couple has managed to do is, again, they returned to Manipur saying that, you know, they had to create a space for themselves where nothing was available. And everything that they did was always very simple. They could perform, they could take their performances and perform it anywhere. You know, it could be just an empty space, an empty room. It could be any space, and somehow they were able to make a performance come alive. And it didn't require too much money, too much, you know, it was nothing complicated, but what they worked on were human emotions. How do you portray human emotions to really connect to an audience? Moving on now to, I think it's a little dark, a bit about my journey as well. This here is a poster of Kanok Kalikai, which I don't know if any of you are familiar, but it's the story of, we have this waterfall in Sora and Cherrapunji called Likai Falls. And the story is that behind it is it's a Khasi legend of this woman who, the name of the falls is after her because this woman Likai jumps down the waterfall after she finds out that she's mistakenly eaten her own child, cooked by a husband. There's something wrong with the color. I think it's a bit okay. Anyway, and I had performed this when I came back in 2016. I had performed this performance and a reinterpretation of the story of Nok Kalikai, to really look and study, to really look at how Likai, if Likai were to be alive in our society today, as this woman, as a woman with a child, with an abusive husband, what was it that led her to take her own life, to jump down the waterfall? And again, you know, looking at a folktale, I really wanted to just to make sense of what we are as a society. And folktales are very simple. They're seemingly simple stories, but they hold so much in them. If the more we look into them, the more we study them, the more we relate to them, there's so much that we can draw from them. And for me, the story of Likai stood out to me as, how do I give voice to this woman? We always, when we think of her story, we think of the tragedy of how she jumps down this waterfall, this huge waterfall, takes her own life, eats a baby, all the gruesome and gory details. But can we actually humanize Likai, and can we actually give her a voice, give her a chance to tell us what her story is all about? So this was performed in 2016 when I came back. It was a solo performance, and the next piece is a piece called Reaching Out to Grasp Roots. I Stand Uprooted. And this piece again draws from two Khasi folktales. One is about the story of Utlen, which is a mythological character, something like a serpent or a snake, but this character that is you know, there's a saying, there is a belief that if you travel in odd numbers, the Tlen would always catch the odd one out. And the Tlen is also reared in terms of the the person who keeps the tlen or rears the tlen, if the person feeds the tlen blood, the tlen will sort of will provide that household or that family with riches and expenses and lots of money, and keep as long as you keep the tlen happy and you provide the tlen with blood, the tlen will also provide you with what you need, with material wealth. And I had taken this performance in light of the very tragic coal mining instance that had happened in 2018 in the Sun mine, when miners were trapped inside a mine. And it was very tragic because the miners were not able to be rescued from the mines, and they were deep inside these rat hole mines that we have here in the Jantia Hills. And I looked at that story. So there were two stories of Utlen and also the story of the Umau Mudbreo, or the human eating boulder. The boulder that, it's again a folktale, that swallows a child as the mother is out working in the fields. And I looked at these two stories and wanted to bring a connection to how this mine would have swallowed the miners who were trapped inside, and the anguish that these miners would have felt being trapped inside, and also how, as a society, as a community, how we're so much after wealth and material wealth and money, and that we are willing to sort of give. We're willing to sacrifice the blood of our fellow beings, to sacrifice human blood in order to make us rich. And here is what I had done is use the mura which sort of signifies what a mine could be, and how would it be if my body was stuck in this mine. And it was really, for me, I think the incident that took place had really affected a lot of us, actually, to think of how human life is so indispensable. Human life is so dispensable that we just, for us, we become so numb to, it no longer affects us. If it isn't something that is close to us, it's like, okay, somebody is trapped inside a mine. How do we feel it? We become so desensitized. So this was really a performance about talking about the horrors of how we've become desensitized, the destruction we're allowing to our hills, and what are we losing touch of this of human emotions. And again, this is what the theater can do. It can bring out emotions that we seem to be losing, I think, as a society. The next pictures also, this was performed at the Evening Club. It was also performed at the Khasi National Darbar Hall. And again, as you can see, very minimalist. I think the space that I chose for me is the mura, and using the jankisha that you see here as my costume, and just a form where my theater is about storytelling, the body and human emotions. Again, just another example of this was a piece that was done in a black box. You can see the space around is completely dark. It's completely black. And this was a piece called Bite. It was talking about the mouth as a political space, teeth as the story of teeth. I have very bad teeth. I've struggled my life throughout because of my teeth. And I wanted to enact the story of a tooth, and how could the story of a tooth relate to us as human beings. So just again, another example of using the body, using space, using this mask. And I'll quickly move on to other examples. This was a recent performance of Usir Lapdiang, the story of a stag who comes up from the plains into the Khasi Hills, and as he travels up, he gets warned by his mother not to go up to the hills, because she said you will be hunted and killed by hunters if you go up. But the stag ignores her and goes up to the hills, climbs up the hills, gets killed and gets butchered high up here in the hills. And the mother sees she sees her butchered son being carried by the hunters. And as she sees this, she lets out a cry, a lamentation, which, as they say, is a sound that has taught us, the Khasis, how to grieve and how to mourn. I had performed this space in Dhaka, in Bangladesh, earlier this year. And you can see what again, defining my own space, which is a ring of earth. And this space is in a museum space. It's in a gallery space. Very similar, I would say, again, an experimental space where you don't have a stage, where you don't have seating for the audience, but the audience just sit around you in a circle, listening to you tell your story. So, example. This is again another example of how you use very minimal props. You just have the antlers for the stag. The murra comes back because, like I said, the murra for me is the space that I take with me. It's also a prop. It's an extension of my body. I use it how I want to use it. Wherever I place it, it becomes my performance space or my performance arena. This is another example of that we had performed of performing journeys. This is with the team from the Welsh and Khati Cultural Dialogues. This was a performance that we had explored through theatre about the relationship between the Welsh missionaries who had come here to the Khasi Hills to bring Christianity. And here, along with Christianity, they also brought the written script. So for us as an oral culture, as an oral community, our words are very important. The spoken word is very important. We're an oral culture, we tell our stories. And our written script, which we adopted, which was sort of given to us by the Welsh missionaries. The alphabet is something that has come. It's an intrusion that has come in from outside. So we really wanted to explore what this relationship is through this performance. So again, if you look at space, this was performed at it's like a small studio a studio space. No, actually, this was inside a church, inside a chapel. Sorry, this was inside a chapel, an old chapel in Wales. And we had set it up, became a performance space, it became a space again of storytelling. And this last performance, a picture of this, and then I'll move on to a short clip, which is to show you an example of a performance so that you can watch, and then we can move to questions. This was a performance that I had done last year. It was about Kapandong Lat, and Kapandong Lat is not a very well-known freedom fighter, a woman freedom fighter from the Khasi Hills, who was also there at the time of Utirat Singh, who was very much active, very much important in this, in the fight, the freedom fight, the freedom movement. And here is a performance where we had performed this in the village of Pandong Lat herself. This is in Nongram Mai. And this was just a use of, I just want to show this example of how these bamboo sticks were used as figures of women. And the Jankashas represented different women. And what Pandong Lat did was what propelled her, what moved her to fight for her community, for people, especially for the women, was because of the kind of abuse, the sexual abuse, the abuse that the women in her community faced, because of the colonizers, because of the British colonizers, because of the soldiers, because of the officers. And it was really her fight to say, the women, I want the women to stand up. I want the women to stand against against this have their voice and stand up and speak up. And again, very minimal use of props. We didn't really need, I didn't really have, we didn't use actors to sort of to be there, but actually use these stick figures just to represent what these women could do, could stand up. So this is an example. And the last piece is just a short theatre piece that we had done from the Welsh Khasi Cultural Dialogue. So I'll just play that and then.
Warriors Liverpool aimed at Lapdiang as his heart. He's the intruder man. I know what him you say, what's dialogue, where warriors we taught dialogue, to Cassie's dialogue, and he who's now must be defended at all costs. You there, I think bystander, hesitating bystander, fussy bystander, bystanding bystander. Blindly, into the role of zombies. Be told, we shall never back down. Be told further, how it was all over after it was done. When the drumbeats had ceased and barking dogs fallen silent, when the fire had turned to embers, this was how one among us spoke, what had lodged unspoken in our hearts.
After we had killed Usier Lapala, severed his antlers, skinned him for the feasting, quartered him for distribution. Even as we drank to victory, we remembered how we were catapulted into bewildering confusion by a caterwauling wail, never heard, never known, never encountered in these hills before. It seems the moment the Lapdiang found its path, she knew. She knew.
Chills with us, spills into us, like the flame he answered down, with his eyes of endless burning heaven. Shoot it, block it, erase it from our memories altogether. But how are we to know that this wailing incantation was one to stay within our bodies? How are we to deal with this wailing incantation that challenges us to dialogue across borders even now?
Okay. So yes, so that was the last clip. I feel I've just, I don't know if you could follow any of it, but it was really, like I said, just a glimpse of so much really. And but whatever you can gain or maybe even understand, or even if you didn't understand anything, please feel free to let me know. I probably would have been more comfortable performing for all of you, but one day perhaps. But this was really just a glimpse, as I said, just an introduction to give you an idea of how different spaces, different performance spaces, and also coming back to a very personal journey of how the theatre has sort of the kind of style, the kind of theatre that I am practicing right now here in Meghalaya. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lapdiang, for your presentation, for taking us across timelines and through different theatres from Europe to different parts of the country as well, and for at least highlighting to us your own journey as well when it comes to theatre. So now we come to the part where we will have a Q&A session where the audience, in this case primarily the students, are encouraged to ask any questions as such, any questions that you might have with regard to the presentation, or for that matter, if not the presentation, then perhaps something else related to theatre and performance, as I had mentioned earlier as well. In case you have any questions at all, please feel free to ask our resource person, because she is someone who is a professional, someone who's been in the field, and perhaps she can let's just say, highlight certain things that you might find useful in case you do decide to take this particular path forward. So are there any questions from the students as such?
Please feel free to ask anything, any comments. And like Mankrav said, doesn't even have to do from the presentation. And yeah, no question is irrelevant. So ask anything. I'm open to talking. Yeah.
So anyway, Lapdiang, I think I have to get the ball rolling because, the students tend to take time, or perhaps sometimes they tend to. Students, in case you have any questions, please, you can either type them in the chat box or you can unmute yourselves. That depends on you. But in the meantime, I will just ask the resource person some questions, just so that we will not have this awkward pause where we wait. So in the meantime, please formulate your questions and come up with some of your questions. So Lapdiang, anyway, I wanted to ask you one question. So see, this is also something that you mentioned before. Khasis are known to be such great storytellers as they sit around the hearth. This is something that we've always heard, and that is also something that you alluded to when we began. It would have been nice if we all sat around the hearth. But one question that arises is, how is it that we hardly ever hear about how most of these very rich stories, and mind you, they are very rich, the stories that we have, we've not heard about them ever being performed as such, at least when it comes to the Khasis. Is it because they were not properly documented, or is it because we truly lack a theatre and performance tradition? I mean, what is it that you found in your own, let's say, journey, in your own research in this particular field?
I think for me, it would be, one is to really not define, I know because for the longest time, I myself fell into this trap of defining what theatre and the different theatre traditions from a more, from an outside perspective, Like I said, we study so much of Western drama, we study a lot of Indian drama, and we kind of compare like, oh, but we don't have such stages, or we don't have such structures, we don't have such traditions. But I also feel that our theatre exists in our also in our everyday lives, and the more I see it, just an example of winter is here now. Of course, here at home we have a fireplace. I'm privileged to have a fireplace, but even if not a fireplace, we have whether we go for funerals, where we say in Khasi Apmit, we sit around the shaula together, at night, or even during Christmas, and we sit around and we tell these stories. So I think theatre, sort of the spirit of theatre, exists in these small gatherings. They may not be, and the audience is also part of who is present at that time, at that particular space. In terms of why they haven't been, maybe we don't need. Also, I keep complaining about we don't have a theatre tradition here, we don't have spaces, but maybe, I don't know if this is correct to say, but maybe we don't need such elaborate theatre traditions also. But I think what's important to me is keeping these stories alive. As a generation, as a young generation now, for all of you, listening to these stories, do you still find any relevance in retelling these stories in your lives? Is it important for you as a community to sit around together, whether it's around a fire, whether it's around something, but to come together, sit and share stories and tell stories to each other? That would probably decide the fate of theatre in Meghalaya. I know in Manipur, like I said, martial arts is something that is so much a part of their lives. Also performance, their dance is very elaborate, it's very physical. They keep it alive through performance. They keep it alive through their bodies, through expression. And for us here, we have our stories. And I feel that just by having these stories itself, remembering these stories, retelling these stories, this is a form of theatre that is inherent in us. How we perform these stories, how they continue to live on, in what spaces they live on, will depend on us, and also how we define that, I think.
Okay, thank you so much, Lapdiang, for that. I suppose we can think of the art of storytelling as a performance in itself, because when you have great storytellers, that in itself draws you into the story and draws you into this performance as such. So thank you so much for that, Lapdiang. So can you just take us through the process of taking up a character? I mean, playing out a particular character, especially one that you are completely unfamiliar with. Let's just say maybe you are taking up a character that is, let's just say, let me just cite an example. Maybe, I don't know whether you can connect this or you can relate, but a very famous performance is the performance of Heath Ledger as the Joker in The Dark Knight. And I mean, of course, it's it won him an Oscar and all of these things. But apparently it was so difficult for him to enact that particular performance that he had to take antidepressants and all of these different things in order to even perform. What is your particular take on, let's just say, on the process of taking up a character? And maybe you can give a commentary on perhaps Heath Ledger's performance, if you can, that is. Maybe something that the kids might be interested in hearing your professional take on his performance as well.
So the performance of Heath Ledger as the Joker in Batman, I don't know if any of you have seen it, have watched it, but he plays this very a character that would be called, I think you can call the character a sociopath, maybe, if I'm using the right word, someone who sort of is not able to conform to what the society expects of how to be. A very difficult character, almost with a criminal intent. And I think to delve into characters like that, we always, to do a character study, is one thing about an actor is, what we were always taught is think of an actor as a vessel. And as a vessel, as a container, what you do is you need to empty out who you are, yourself, your personality as yourself. Me as Lapdiang, you learn how to empty out who you are and kind of take in what this other character would be. And you start by very, studying sort of the background of the character. For example, the Joker would be, what would have caused the Joker to be the Joker? What would have caused the Joker to the point of, to be so malicious and to lack sort of even a conscience? And you look at many different ways, actually many different techniques. You slowly maybe look at mannerisms. you look at emotions, you break it up. One character does not have to become, you think of the Joker as a series of emotions, as a series of mannerisms, as a series of a background of why would this, always sort of a question is, why would this person behave like this, or why would this character behave like this, why would this character speak like this, what would be the walk of that character, what would be the gaze of that character, how would the character look, is it a character that would avert their eyes, is it a character that would willingly stare and look at somebody in the face, is it a character that has a secret to hide, is it a character that has nothing to hide, is it a character that feels shame, embarrassment, or is it a character that just feels pure, with an intent to harm, to hurt, to kill? And of course, the performance of Heath Ledger, the late Heath Ledger, because he also died shortly after that. He wasn't able to receive his award, his Oscar, is something that, it would take, it takes a lot of preparation, I think, for an actor to reach that level. And then there's so many other actors as well, if you look at who kind of follow this this technique of really studying a character to the point of becoming that character. And it really means you give up who you are for that moment in time. So like I said earlier, also for me, I think when I started the theater, when I started acting, I found a freedom in becoming somebody else for that moment in time, for that short time period. I found a freedom in living a different life, accepting a different life, portraying a different life, imagining a different life, breathing a different life, emoting a different life, expressing a different life. And that's how I think the preparation behind it would be.
Yeah, thank you, Lapdiang, for that. Once again, waiting for the kids to perhaps throw a few comments. One question would be very nice from the students as such. Otherwise, we would require you to come to college and force them into a performance along with you, Lapdiang, if they've to make up for the fact that they are keeping quiet like this.
Oh, that's okay. I like I said, I think I would have been very much comfortable meeting all of you face to face, and also doing a workshop with all of you where you actually get to experience space, emotions, body, text, all of this. So
yes, so we have one question. So the participant asks, good evening, a question from my part is, how long do you take in preparing for a play, considering if there's a deadline for the event?
Okay, thank you for that question. So how long do I take? I personally would, if I were to have to, I think the time would be taken if you already have a script ready. If a script is already ready and all you need to do is get in actors and play the part, it takes a much shorter time. But for me personally, I would always say the process can be as long as you need to be. It can be up to a year to prepare an entire play. The more you prepare for it, the more it works, the more you get into the nuances of it, the nuances of the script, the nuances of the character, of the play, what you can change, what you can experiment with. But the minimum, I usually would give myself a month, taking everything into consideration. Also, it's, rehearsals are so important. The more you repeat it, the more you repeat the lines, the more they make sense to you. So I would give myself a month to work on something. Little less than that would be would really do injustice, I think, if you really want to do something that is good and interesting.
Yeah, thank you for that again, Lapdiang. So in case any of you want to take up this particular field, remember 1 month is minimum deadline as per the professional advice from Lapdiang. Okay, so any other suggestions, comments? Yeah, I'll just come up with just one more question, which may also serve as the final question in case we don't have any other questions from the participants. But of course, I encourage any more questions from the participants. So, Lapdiang, since you are a performer, you are a performing artist as such, what suggestions would you give to any of these aspiring artists in our state? Yeah, because you are someone who is taking up, let's just say, a field or taking up a particular vocation, a profession that is not necessarily in line with the kind of professions that we are associated with here, because here we only hear of people trying to get government jobs and things like that, but we can't rely on that as such. So this is one other field, but of course it has its challenges, its obstacles. So in case you have some of these artists, not necessarily who want to take up performance, but it could be some of them who want to do that, take that up. Tell us about your own journey as an artist in the state, and what are the recommendations that you can give to them? What are the pointers that you can highlight to them so that they will at least go into this with at least a professional leading them, or at least showing them what they are to expect?
Thank you, Mankrao, for that question. So this is really important, I think. Yes, one is to be an artist. It's for me, I think it's a calling. It's really a calling. You have to be so determined to take up this profession, because it's definitely not easy. It's not a 9-to-5 job. It's not something that you can shut yourself. You say, okay, I have this performance. I work from this time to this time, and then I forget about it. It also doesn't, frankly, it doesn't give you sort of an income that you would expect, if you were doing any other profession. But just for I think for me, what drives me to take up this profession is, one, of course, is my determination, and it's really my passion actually to kind of want to be an artist. And I think, like I said, if I don't know if this helps, but looking at my journey of getting into drama school, finishing drama school, being in Europe for some time, studying these different styles of acting, different styles of performance in Europe, I realized that if I were to come back home, why do I want to come back home? Why do I want to be an artist back home? How am I going to earn as an artist back home? And these were very real questions, are still very real questions. I now have a son, and I have to think, am I doing this just as a hobby, or is it really my profession that can also that will also feed my family, that can also support my family, that I can also take care of my son. And for me, it's really about the reason why you want to be, the reason why you want to be an artist, the reason why I want to be a storyteller, a performer, is I find that by writing about these stories, by telling these stories, by performing these stories, I am able to keep my identity alive. I'm able to talk about what my community is all about. And the other thing is, professionally for me, you have so many art institutions, organizations, art organizations around the country, around the world, that will fund for the arts. And the arts are really given a lot of money goes into many, everybody will tell you, be an engineer, be a doctor, or, do business, or do this, do that. There's a lot of money in that. But you do have a section also which is dedicated to the arts. There is funding, there are scholarships for the arts, for artists who are genuinely very, very serious about what their art is all about. And I always tell myself, to imagine a society without artists is really a dead society. We would just function like robots. We would function with no, right now most of us, are always on our phones. We're either watching memes on Netflix, on Hotstar, on this and that, and we're constantly looking for an outlet for entertainment. And I think artists are so important within our society. So for me, it's really about reaching out to these different organizations, reaching out to different artists, forming networks, teaching, holding workshops for the students, and also just this whole, I think this passion or this need for me to want to tell stories, to want to kind of act as a mirror to what our society is. It's a difficult profession, but it is not impossible. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you so much, Lapdiang. I think it has answered a few of the questions. But of course, a journey is always complicated. You have a certain trajectory, but all of us have our personal journeys to walk through. And I hope that your journey will continue to bear fruit. And I hope as well that you will be able to inspire many others as well to take up this particular line through your own performances. Now we have come to the end of this particular program. First, and as the chair, I also have to give the vote of thanks. First and foremost, I would like to thank Lapdiang Syiem for giving us the time so that she can talk to us about her performances, her experience in this particular field. Thank you so much for that little dog. It's very, a good wake-up call for some of the others. At the same time, I would like to thank my department colleagues, Ms. Bada, who helped to bring all of this together. And at the same time, for all of the others as well who have worked behind the scenes to make this possible. I would like to thank the IQAC Senior College IQAC for allowing us to have this platform so that we can have this special lecture given to us by Lapdiang Syiem. I would also like to thank the principal for his encouragement in allowing us to have programs such as this. And also at the same time, I would like to thank once again the department and of course the students. Of course, the numbers do not necessarily reflect all of the students that we have, the students who are interested in this particular kind of meeting and lecture. But regardless, thank you so much to the students who have taken their time to attend a program. We know that everything has gone back to offline, and online can be difficult, and yet we are very, very grateful for you all for giving the time, because this is in fact the last day of college. And so we end on that note. And once again, thank you to all of you. And I would also like to take this opportunity to wish all of you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year in advance. And thank you once again, and have a very good evening to all of you. I officially close this particular meeting.